My superpower is engineering. I've been a roboticist almost all my life now. I think engineering is just as creative as the arts. Engineers, we solve problems. It impacts the world. It makes a difference. Without IEEE, I don't think I would have the network that I have. Anyone can get involved with IEEE-USA at any time. There's an immense amount of value for anyone at any career stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aline McNall, and I'm a Senior Legislative Representative at IEEE-USA. I'll be presenting our IEEE-USA Washington update this afternoon and look forward to your questions at the end of the presentation. Feel free to put any questions or comments you have in the chat function, and I'll check in at the end. All right, let's get started. Oh, slide. So a quick update on some space policy. Congress is currently looking at FAA reauthorization. So those discussions are underway in both the House and the Senate. Two space companies, so Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin, are beginning or resuming their commercial space suborbital human space flights. And so there's some regulatory discussions about that. FAA regulations that focus on public safety with respect to launch are currently under debate. And then FAA's ability to enact regulations regarding spaceflight, particularly the participants on commercial vehicles, are currently under restriction per the Commercial Space Launch Act in 2004. And so those are currently under debate, particularly with respect to the two companies that are seeking to resume commercial suborbital space flights. Will the restrictions be allowed to expire this year, or will they actually be continued and reenacted into law is the scope of that debate. Next slide. This slide is a little bit wordy because it actually covers a lot of the different STEM components of the agreement between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi when he visited recently. So they are agreed to the U.S.-India Comprehensive Global and Strategic Partnership during the Prime Minister's visit. So some of the STEM components, or the science, engineering, technology, and math components, include the vital role of technology. From January 2023, there was an inaugural initiative on critical and emerging technology. So that was a part of the partnership discussed when Prime Minister visited. The partnership also fosters an open and accessible, as well as a secure technology ecosystem, which is based on mutual trust and values between our two nations. It sets the course for renewed frontiers in space cooperation. Particularly NASA and the Indian Space Agency will develop a strategic framework for human spaceflight cooperations by the end of 2023. For those IEEE members in India, the space sector of India is actually based near our office. So I hope that many members in India will get involved in that, as well as those of our members who are involved on the NASA side of the partnership. The partnership also celebrated the delivery of NASA India synthetic aperture radar satellites to the satellite center in Bengaluru, India. It promoted and adapted regulations to facilitate greater technology sharing between our two nations. It included an MOU on semiconductor supply chains, as well as established a joint partnership on quantum technology. There were actually 35 joint collaborations between the National Science Foundation in the US and India's Department of Science and Technology. And they also discussed collaborations on AI and scientific infrastructure. Defense components were also part of that agreement. So there was a lot of different STEM areas, and we certainly look forward to improved and increased collaborations between the US and India as a result of this partnership. Next slide. A quick update on NIST. So NIST is launching a new public working group on generative AI, which builds on the successful NIST AI risk management framework. The participants are currently folks are being asked to volunteer to participate in this new public working group. So anyone who is interested, please feel free to reach out, and I can give you the website to sign up. Participants will be responsible for developing the generative AI profile as a part of the AI risk management framework. So CHIPS announced a selection of committee for the Board of Trustees of the National Semiconductor Technology Center, which is a key factor in the CHIPS and Science Act that was passed recently. That R&D component of that bill included the National Semiconductor Technology Center, and so we're very pleased that the Board of Trustees was the selection committee for the Board of Trustees has been announced. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission authorized the restart of NIST's research reactor. So NIST Center for Neutron Research, the reactor for that center has been shut down actually since February of 2021. And NIST's Reactor Safety Evaluation Committee is now completing a review that will confirm the conditions for the restart and will ensure that they've been met before actually the testing begins. Next slide. This is a chart I think I've included in prior legislative updates, but I did want to include it again since we are currently debating budget issues with our congressional offices. So the CHIPS Act, of course, was a authorization as well as an appropriations bill. So this chart gives a little bit of an idea of where the president's request was in 2024 versus what was in the CHIPS Act. So the line on this chart represents CHIPS Act funding, and then the bars on it, of course, represent the different funding for the different agencies in the CHIPS authorization. I would like to personally thank the Federation of American Scientists and Matt Horahan over there for creating this chart, and certainly enjoy working with Matt and that organization, and certainly thank them for the diligent info that they produce in terms of funding charts. Next slide. A quick update on defense appropriations. So I've included some of the program elements that our members care most about, and I certainly have information on other program elements should there be any questions at the end. So IEEE focuses a lot on our advocacy efforts for defense on defense funding, particularly the RDT&E overall funding levels, the 6.1 basic research accounts, 6.2 applied research, and 6.3 advanced technology development. I also included the overall defense science and technology funding. So for comparison, of course, the RDT&E funding overall, with respect to the FY24 numbers in comparison to FY23 enacted numbers, there was a 5% increase there. Where IEEE has a lot of concern is in the 6.1 and 6.2 and 6.3 accounts that we actually see the 13% cut for all of those, and the 13% cut for the defense science and technology funding. So this lays out our advocacy strategy, and our kind of path forward will be to work with Congress to ensure robust funding in these accounts at the Department of Defense, so that we can actually have better results in terms of our key technology areas, and the programs there will be able to use the basic research better if there is, of course, more funding for that. So that's always the argument we make with Congress, and I certainly look forward to reaching out to House and Senate appropriators to ensure that this funding is reinstated or is as high as possible. Next slide. So discussions about the National Defense Authorization Act are underway. A couple of things regarding those discussions that I wanted to just mention. So the Congress is currently in recess. So they go home to the districts and, of course, meet with constituents and attend events and work from districts. And so we, of course, call that congressional recess. And the House will continue debate on the NDAA, or the National Defense Authorization Act, when it is when recess is over. So Space Force strategy is, of course, under debate. So the Space Force funding levels have been kind of a source of debate for quite some time. Appropriators are hoping for transparency regarding how Space Force activities will support overall national defense strategy. So I've talked about the national defense strategy in these legislative updates before. And so how the Space Force programs and activities fit into that is currently what's being debated on the Hill. The Senate is looking to actually bypass the spending caps for defense program that were laid out in the debt limit agreement. And so we are certainly hopeful that the Senate NDAA, or the Senate Defense Authorization Act, will include some higher funding levels. So again, we're debating with the Hill on these funding levels and kind of the policy issues in the Defense Authorization Act. IEEE focuses on AI and things like remote sensing technology and other policy issues that would be a part of the Authorization Act. And I'm certainly happy to answer any questions about the legislative initiatives we're pushing into NDAA in this cycle. Next slide. To shut down or not shut down. So a lot of folks in Washington are actually expecting a federal government shutdown. So whether or not that actually occurs is, of course, always a debate. The fiscal year of 2023 does end on September 30th. So what we're looking at is a federal shutdown starting October 1st, and whether or not that actually happens. It is likely that should that occur, House Republicans would be blamed for it. However, IEEE is, of course, a nonpartisan organization, and so we will work with all sides of the aisle to ensure that federal government does not shut down. As a quick comparison, so in 2018 and 2019, there was, of course, a large government shutdown, and the Congressional Budget Office did estimate that that resulted in an unrecoverable $3 million loss to the U.S. economy. And so these are one of the talking points that we bring up to Congress, that regardless of whether or not they reinstate funding for, say, the federal workers who in some cases stop working or have to pause their day jobs or have to come in without pay in certain cases, what happens to the rest of the economy is certainly unfortunate. And IEEE certainly uses information like that of the Congressional Budget Office to advocate for not shutting down the federal government. House leaders are considering a stopgap measure right now to avoid a government shutdown, and whether or not that moves forward, of course, is under debate. A quick update on earmarks. So they are actually on the rise in FY 2024 appropriations bills, but these are kind of the topics of debate as members debate funding levels. And so I did want to mention that it seems like they're very much on the rise in FY 24. The federal shutdown, of course, is related to FY 23, but noticing these trends is something that can affect kind of some of the debates on the Hill about funding. Last year's predictions by the Congressional Budget Office do show lower than predicted spending and deficits, so that's actually good news. And again, we're looking at both of those sides of the debate on the Hill as we approach the September 30th deadline. So IEEE and other groups are certainly discussing budgets and international competition with Congress to avoid the shutdown. So the idea that Europe and other nations around the world, India, China, Europe, Russia, they have different ways of funding their federal programs. And so whereas the US does have a tendency to shut down on occasion, other nations do not. They have a different budget structure. And so this idea that, the rest of the world certainly is not shutting down is one of the messages we certainly try to bring to Congress to help avoid the shutdown. Next slide. So I'll take questions, comments, or wise remarks at the moment, if anyone has any regarding any of the topics of today or other issues you might be interested in. Coming from Brendan Godfrey, it is not uncommon for DoD S&T PB, I'm assuming that's President's budget, to show cuts and for Congress to then restore them, most of the funds. To what extent is this just a game played by DoD to increase its TOA? Brendan, can you clarify TOA for everyone listening? I can speak to the first part of your statement, which is that it is true that the president's budget does tend to cut defense funding. And that is something we've seen over and over and over again. So you are very correct that is a game that is played on a fairly regular basis. Whether or not, I see, total obligation authority, thank you. Whether or not Congress does restore it is always kind of one of those nail-biting situations, but they do have a tendency to restore it. This comes from the university community, from the professional society world, and from companies. We do have to advocate for that funding again and again and again every year, and so that's something that we are currently doing. It is not unexpected that Congress would reinstate funding levels. It's just whether or not they reinstate it at the at the applied research level or at the basic research level, right? 6.1 is often not necessarily as reinstated as the other kind of budget programs that we care about. And as many of our members know, 6.1 is, of course, where the most basic research ideas get started. And so we want to ensure that that funding stream is as high as possible. And that's always been our advocacy strategy on the Hill. So thank you for that question. Brendan did mention also, Brendan Godfrey did mention that Defense News just published an article, DoD looks to block Chinese and Russian influence on US academia, which is likely to be controversial. Yes, very much so. So Congress is very focused on both the competition with Russia as well as competition with China. IEEE is a global organization. We try and focus on international competition issues in general. But we are certainly aware that Congress is very focused on U.S. competitiveness with each of these two nations. These kind of issues with respect to our members in other countries certainly do come up in our discussions about our organization. The Russia-Ukraine situation is certainly something that comes up on a fairly regular basis in our office, as well as in congressional meetings. How the U.S. is influencing kind of that particular conflict has certainly become a topic of debate, whether it's from the perspective of remote sensing technology that would help kind of see and monitor troop activity and that sort of thing, or whether it's, you know, a nuclear issue or a just an international general competitiveness issue with China. We've entered into a lot of different kind of discussions on the Hill and do try and support our U.S. members in those discussions. Are there any other questions from anyone else listening in? Thank you, Brendan Godfrey, for the insightful and interesting questions. Seeing no more questions, I think we'll conclude today's update. I look forward to speaking with you all in 2 weeks for another Washington update. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.